There we go. We are started. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Welcome to Grace Christian Fellowship. Glad to have you here this morning. Place where we're saved by grace, walking with Christ, loving one another. That's Mount Vernon, Washington. That way, see, if you get the video, you know right where we're at. That's the whole deal here. I'm always, everybody else here, so you guys folks on the camera, everybody's looking at me like, don't you know where we're at? I love it. All right, let's see, just a couple notifications here. Wednesday prayer, as always, more than welcome to come. If you can, text your prayer requests to me. Phone numbers on the back of the bulletin. Ladies Fellowship and Prayers on Tuesday from 7 to 8:30 is, as it says, a time of fellowship, support, and prayer. If you have any questions, see Miss Tracy and ask her questions. Upcoming events, Christmas decoration will be on November 30th, just after Thanksgiving. So that's when we'll get together, and lunch will be provided. So if you want to come and help, everybody pitch in together, get it done, and lunch too. So can't beat that. And then it's not on here, but the ladies will be having a Christmas party on the 14th of December, which is a Saturday. All right, so if you have any questions on that, who's our point of contacts for that? That would be the lovely sound lady Sarah up there. So there we go. Is there any other things going on that we are not aware of? All right, what's that?
Lunch afterwards.
Oh yes, thank you. We have some leftovers, some good leftovers from yesterday. So we have sandwiches and soup. So feel free to stay for lunch after we're done. So free lunch, can't beat that. You know, so we feed you in the Word and with a sandwich. So yay! So there you go. All right, again, anything else? All righty. Let's get ready to dive into God's Word here. And we're going to be in Genesis 42. Father God, we just thank you now as we get ready to worship you in the Word. We pray, Father, that you would soften our hearts. Let us take a breath and just be ready to take it in, or to take in what you have to tell us. Father, I pray that you give us ears to hear it and hearts that consider it, Lord, so that we take your word out the door with us today. We just ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Life has come against us. What a time in Jacob's life here. It's like he's there, the brothers have went to Egypt, they're returning. They encountered an official there that through translator, you have to always remember, and it tells us in his word that Joseph, their brother that they can't recognize, he's probably made up totally looking like an Egyptian, walking like an Egyptian, you know, that's what he's doing. You can't tell. And he's talking to a translator, so he's speaking a different language than what they understand, and helping them out. They don't know he's helping them out because he's talking rough. He's playing a game here a little bit to see, testing the waters with them to see what's going on. He accused them of spying and detains their brother Simeon as a vouchsafe against them spying, and sends them with a surprise of putting the money in the bag. And we're gonna encounter this again. I'm telling you what's going on, but we're gonna encounter it again. Last week we saw where they opened up just one bag. Well, that's gonna expand this morning. And of course, in doing this, the guilt of what they had done to Joseph is there. And that is plaguing them, hounding them, if you will. But that isn't what we're going to look at today. That's going to come up down the line, further down the line. Today what we're going to look at is a couple different things. We're going to talk about contagious fear. Contagious fear. Because we know fear, like a virus, once it starts going, can move unchecked. And so the contagious fear. That's one thing I reminded during our, thank goodness, the election season is finally over. Everybody's glad. It's like all the ads will be off now for the moment. But everybody plays on fear. Fears of one kind or another. Be they real or imagined, they play on fears in order to garner your vote. And I'm glad, I hope everybody here voted. That's one thing I always tell everybody, vote, because they wouldn't be spending, like one of the candidates raised and spent $1 billion. There was a senator down in Texas, his opponent had raised $100 million to just get a Senate office. It's just like, they don't even make that much. But just to show you how valuable our votes are. Every vote is valuable. They're spending money to get your vote. So always, and I say that so that you can spread that news along with the good news of when people, especially young people, are very skeptical. They're like, oh, I don't know about voting. I'm just like, need to vote. Anyway, contagious fear. Then we're going to encounter a bitter outlook. Ever had a bad day? Or you just see everything as a bad day for the rest of the day, or maybe the rest of the week or the month. You know, and so a bitter outlook that just leads to negativity in how you see things. We're going to talk a little bit about trauma today. Because we're going to see that main character of our story has been traumatized. And what that means and how that messes with our thinking. And then, of course, this trauma leads to the forgetting of God's promises. All right? Let's dive in. Contagious fear. So now the brothers realize that they're going to realize they're all in trouble. Genesis 42, verse 29-32. So this passage, first part of this, will summarize what I kind of summarized already, because it says, when they came to Jacob, they arrived home, their father, in the land of Canaan. They told him all that had happened to them, saying, the Lord of the land spoke, as part of this I could just hear that, he spoke roughly to us. That's all I can think of on that. He made us cry, and it was like, took us to be spies of the land. Verse 31, but we said to him, we are honest men, which is a blatant lie. You know, these guys are not honest men at all. And it says, and we have never been spies. Verse 32, we are 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, and the youngest is this day with our father in the land of Canaan. So they give them a rough story, what they said. This is what we said. And of course they kind of, add their own little flavor to that, as you're going to see in a moment. Because then they recap Joseph's request to them. Verse 33-34, it says, then the man, the Lord of the land, said to us, by this I shall know that you are honest men. But I could just imagine Joseph as he's saying that. So it's like, by this we'll know that you're honest men, because he knows they're lying right to his face. It's like, you little rascals. He's like, by this we'll know, leave one of your brothers with me. So now this is them relating back. Notice how they kind of soften it a little bit. They're kind of making it sound a little bit better than what happened, because, I think they know already they're going to have to sell this to Dad. And so they're, I don't know. I remember when I was a kid and I had to go tell my story to the parents, that story was very much spun in my favor. That's how we operate. That's what they're doing. It's like, so they're, leave one of your brothers with me, and take grain for the family of your households, and go your way. Bring your younger brother to me, then I shall know that you are not spies, but honest men. And I will deliver your brother to you, and you shall trade in the land. So, here they go. They present this positive spin, and they perceive that Jacob will not be excited about this request. So they already kind of know Jacob's heart about Benjamin. They're like, he's probably not been letting Benjamin out of his sight. He's been watching all over him because of just everything that had happened. And so there would be some of their thinking on this is, they know their crime. They don't want their crime to be revealed. They don't want it to be revealed, what they had done. because they know this would be a loss of status with their father, which would be more of a loss because some of these kids already have a bad reputation with dad. We're going to see with his final blessing when he's like, yeah, you were bad and you were bad. It ain't going to go well for them. And so, and then they decide, remember, they've only unloaded one piece of the cargo so far. Now it's time to unload everything. And they discover what they don't know, but it's Joseph's generosity towards them. But they're not going to see it as that. And verse 35, and as they emptied their sacks, behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw their bundles of money, they were afraid. So before we get to the fear part, I want to give you a historical note here. Because I always love to give you these notes because I want us always to know that our Bibles are accurate and true and good. Especially for histories like this. You could just gloss over it, right? You're just like, oh, money. But you have to realize in ancient Egypt, they didn't have money. Okay, so what's being talked about here then? Well, the word for money in there is actually just a word, the Hebrew word for silver. In other words, like chunks of silver. They didn't have images on them. Like last night we were talking about stamped coins. Me and John were talking about stamped coins. But they didn't, at this point, they didn't have that. So they would just have chunks of metal. And in this case, it's silver. And silver would be valuable in Egypt because at the time they did not have silver mines there. It was a metal they didn't have much of, so that meant more value. So that when they're taking this chunk out, what we call money would have just been like chunks of silver. And that's exactly the way the original wording says. Totally accurate to the time and place. That's awesome to me. Again, telling me the Word of God is accurate and true. But again, they open it up, and now everybody's afraid. Everyone's afraid. This is contagious fear. Because it wasn't just the kids that were fear, but the moment they're opening up, even dad now is afraid. They're all afraid about this. It said earlier when they opened up and just saw the one sack that their hearts failed them. And now everybody is all afraid. They know that they've already been accused as spies. You are spies! That says, you're spies. And so it's just like, so the coin's in the bag, potential evidence now of theft. Because it would look like, how do you spin that one? It's like, again, as Mark talked about last week, it's like if you're paying for groceries with cash, but then walked out and you find the cash in your bags. It would bother you. Like, oh, just a second, how do I explain this? Because it's not like back then they had receipts or anything. You couldn't like, oh, here's my printed receipt, don't have that. I just have all the groceries in my hand. That's, oops, how does this work? So it makes them very afraid. How are they supposed to go back? How are they were told to return with the brother, but now they already look like thieves. This is horrible. And Jacob joins in with the fear. And as I said, fear is contagious. It goes after you. History is replete with examples of that. You know, as I relate to you, it's like it was fun on our Boston trip being able to see Lexington, Concord, and then a little bit outside of Boston on the north side where it was Breeds Hill, or many people know Bunker Hill. Well, I bring that up because fear was contagious. On the Battle of Lexington and Concord, the redcoats outnumbered the colonists at the time. And yet, at the end of the day, because of what had happened, they were afraid because they had a lot of casualties on the end. Because, of course, the colonists didn't fight the standard fight. None of this line up in front of each other and shoot rifles at each other. No, they were sniping them from behind rocks and trees and fences, everything else. It's just like not fighting fair. Yes. It's like, always remember, war is never fair. And if you can fight unfairly and win, it's a thing. So that's what they did. And so this started fear. Because suddenly, the redcoats the predominant army of the world in that day were getting their butts kicked by a bunch of podunk rednecks from out in the sticks. We're getting them. And that stirred up fears. This is legit. They were like starting like, what is going on? This is not the way this story should have went. Well, then that happened in April, and then in June, just a couple months later, is when the battle, they noticed the colonists were gathering up on Breed's Hill outside of Boston. Bunker Hill is like over to the left, but everybody calls it Bunker Hill because Bunker Hill is just a cool name, isn't it? And so that's up on Breed's Hill is where they were at, and they saw that they were up there. So the Redcoats decided, let's go get them off the hill. And they sent, I think it's like almost 2,000 troops to the 800 troops that the colonists had up there. Well, the colonists, in a sense, won, even though they had to leave. They had to get out of the hill. They were losing the battle, but the casualties that they were inflicting on the Redcoats, because the Redcoats made a dumb move. You never try to fight an uphill battle. Isn't that the thing in life? Don't you some days feel like the day is an uphill battle? Well, uphill battles are the thing. Whenever you have to fight an uphill battle, the guys on top of the hill have the advantage. All the colonists had the advantage, and they just rained down fire, inflicted a lot of Redcoat casualties, even though in the end of the day, the Redcoats took the hill because the colonists were able to retreat and run away, kind of thing, get out of there. But when the Redcoats went back, they said, well, we don't need this hill. They went back into the city, but they were licking severe wounds. And fear had struck in so much that the Redcoats left Boston because they were afraid. And they had no reason to be. They still outnumbered the colonists. But fear, contagious fear, had taken hold of their hearts. And for us as Americans, well, thank God for that. It worked out well for us. But contagious fear is just, it comes after you. And it's coming after these guys. And now this starts to work against him mentally. And he begins to express that life is against him. And we perceive Jacob embraces a bitter outlook because of this, almost instantaneously in this conversation. He's seeing negativity. And verse 36 says, and Jacob their father said to them, you have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin. All this has come against me. Like one commentator says, Jacob is singing this song. No one loves me, this I know. My misfortunes tell me so. This is where he's at. He's like, everything's bad. This is the worst. He says that you have bereaved me. What's he saying there? And I'm convinced at this time, he doesn't know that the boys had anything to do with Joseph's demise. But he still blames them. He blames them. They're the older brother. That's always the way it worked. I was the older brother. I don't know. Who here was the oldest sibling in the house? Yeah. Who got blamed for everything? The oldest sibling. It's like, oh! That's the way it rolls. And so these guys, he's harboring blame for them because they didn't rescue Joseph from the wild beast that killed him. So that's the way he's looking. You bereaved me of this, but he's also indirectly blaming God. He's blaming God for this horrible turn of events. Everything. And the thing is when you start to have a negative outlook, everything starts to become about yourself. It becomes very self-focused because he says, you have bereaved me. It wasn't the family, it was him. You bereaved me. And that just shows what's going on, is where he's at in his heart. And it'll become a pattern in this. And his bitter outlook is even more so. Somebody else pointed this out to me. Is he just writes Simeon off? Remember, he says, and Simeon, Joseph's no more, and Simeon's no more. It's like, hey, I could just see if Simeon was there. It's like, hey, I'm still here. I'm still alive. But he's like, as far as he's concerned, he's no more too. He's good as dead. That's just how his outlook is and how he sees the situation. Not even with the fight. And his despair is fully revealed at the end of the verse there, as I bring this up, where he says, and all this has come against me. Now, we have the gift, you and I, as we read scriptures, we know how the whole story is going to go. And so this is now working against him. We have hindsight. We know that this despairing assessment would be totally inaccurate. And yet all he can see is doom. Just a second, I'm going to turn off the speaker. That one's starting to die a little bit. So pray as we do speaker shopping. So anyway, so he says, all this has come against me. All he can see is doom, which is inaccurate. It's not really the case, but that's because we see, and this is usually the case in our lives, right? We can be like doom and gloom and woe and despair, and our friends will be like, hey, it's really not that bad. But when you're in the middle of it, that's all you can see. You become like, what's the thing that they do on the horse blind things that, where they make the horse just see one direction. It's just like eye patch kind of things to guide you, and that's what you become. You like just looking in one direction. And all this has come against him. All he sees is doom. Of course, his oldest son, the one who tried to save Joseph, he comes up with a radical plan. Just induces this, and it says, verse 37, then Reuben said to his father, kill my two sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you. And I don't know the age of his sons, but I'm sure this probably was not a thrilling offer. Like, Dad just said that he would kill us. And you think, what? It's like, and we didn't sign off on this deal. but there he is. He's going radical. He's like, and I know Reuben, he probably feels bad about the whole situation too. He's dealing with guilt. He's like, well, this is the way I can cover my guilt, cover all my crimes. Remember before, he's already been in trouble for sleeping with one of the concubines. He wants to somehow make things right. He's been having difficulty. Last time he tried to save Joseph, that didn't work. The other brothers sold him off before he could get back. So he's trying to find a way to get it back, but Jacob doesn't take the offer. He is so just negative on this that no, even that is not an offer he's going to do. It says, verse 38, he said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm should happen to him on the journey that you are to make, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol. That would be, Sheol's the grave. It's like, you're going to bring me to the grave. It's like, phrase, some people's like, you're killing me. Like, at home will be like, he's doing something with like, oh, you're killing me, Smalls, those kind of things. It's like, that's what he's saying there, but he's serious, not joking. He's like, you're going to kill me with all this. You're bereaving me, and Benjamin's the only one left. I love how he says Benjamin's the only one left to the other 10 boys that are there. Imagine how that's feeling. Like, oh yeah, I see how Dad sees us. We're not even part of the equation. Yeah. So that's his outlook. That's what he's like. Benjamin was the only one that's the last son of his favorite wife, Rachel. And so he was the one that he's got the plans for now. He's going to take over. For where Joseph is not there, Benjamin's going to take over. That was his intentions, to make it clear in front of all of them. This self-focused, bitter outlook. He says, you'll bring down my gray hairs to Sheol. All this speaks volumes of what's going on in Jacob's mind. And when I was looking at this, at first I was like, man, Jacob, dude, get a grip. But then I thought a little bit more about what's going on. I gained a little bit more empathy and sympathy for Jacob on this. I started to realize that Jacob is speaking out of the trauma that had happened in his life. trauma has great effects when it happens. We've had a lot of times here where I know Bill has spoken about grief, and I have brought it up, and others have brought up grief as something as a trauma that we have to deal with. But that's an element of trauma. I want us to step back and just think about trauma as it is and how it affects us. It has a great, huge effect. And we're seeing it for Jacob right here, the anxiety he's feeling, the fear. Those are products of trauma. What kind of trauma? I have a list. This guy, when I started to list it, I realized, holy smokes, this guy has been beat up by life. Some of it self-inflicted, some of it from others. Let's go through his list, the list of trauma. This will make you feel good about your day, okay? If you're feeling bad about your day, when we go through his trauma, you're like, oh yeah, hey, I'm doing okay. Let's start out with his trauma. First, he was forced to leave home due to sin against his father and brother. That's trauma. I've known folks that had to leave home, had to get out of the house, and the trauma that has done to them, how it's affected their outlook, how it's affected their thinking. He had to leave home because of it. He lied and cheated his father and brother. His life was threatened. He had to get out. Man, when you have to leave home, that's a problem. That's when I'm bringing this up. I think about it like in the summer, I did the counseling for the Royal Family Kids, and one of the major components of that is training for trauma. All these kids, all these foster kids, and the trauma that they went through, and how we as counselors have to be ready for that rodeo. How they handle it. And there's different levels of trauma and abuse that these kids have had to deal with. And that's what Jacob is dealing with, trauma to his life. He was swindled on his wedding night with a replacement bride. They would not love. See, it's just like we don't think about, but in his shoes, imagine he's worked for 7 years for Rachel. Whoa, she's the hottie that he's ready to marry to. And then switcheroo that night, imagine that. What? Leah, what are you doing here? What is happening? This is the fear, the trauma, the anger, everything that's going on with that. The next part, next slide. He was forced to flee an abusive uncle. Again, now he's forced to flee and get out of there because, his Uncle Laban is and the sons are watching him we're tired of you. You're taking everything that we have. That's hard on the family. That's hard on him mentally and psychologically to deal with that. To have to leave again. Then, of course, he leaves and then he has to face the fear of facing a wronged brother. Remember we talked about that. He was on his way back home. He didn't know what Esau would do. He was fully expecting Esau to steal half of his family and he would have to run again. That's trauma in and of its own self. And remember, even though they kind of hugged and made up a little bit, I don't really feel he ever really reconciled that. And that was, again, that's part of trauma sometimes. We don't fully realize how to deal with it. And then after that, he's unable to reconcile with father and mother. Rachel, or Rebecca, his mom, at some point, she's just not there. Doesn't even tell us when she died or anything. She's just not in the picture. So apparently she's probably dead. So he never was able to hey mom, boy, we really botched that one up. Never had that chance. And then his relationship with Isaac was never repaired. So you can imagine when you have an unrepaired relationship, what that does to you. Then even more so, and then he lost of the love of his life in childbirth. So he didn't get to live with Rachel to their old age. She died in childbirth with Benjamin. That's trauma again. Then, of course, the death of his favorite son, Joseph. Remember, he thinks he's dead. We know he's not, but he thinks he is. And not just any old death. They showed him torn up rags with blood on him. So I can't imagine as a parent seeing that and thinking your child was torn up by a beast and eaten. That would be traumatic. That'd be horrifying. And then now lastly, now the loss of Simeon and the potential loss of Benjamin and family starvation. This is where he's at. I just listed 8 different potential traumas for this guy. This guy should be, by all senses, a basket case. He is mentally like, whoa, gone. And now I understand. I have great sympathy for him now. Thinking about this, trauma is just, he's truly suffering from PTSD. He really is, truly. All these traumas are just messing with him. It's changing his thinking, changing how he's processing life. And that's what trauma does. Trauma begins to inform our decisions. And a lot of times, because it's trauma we haven't even really fully remembered or stuff like that, that can happen where we'll downplay it. That's where I really feel like what we do most with trauma is we just downplay it. Sometimes we downplay it so much that we won't even associate, oh, that was okay. That event that was hugely painful and everything else, I got through that. Really? Did you really get through it? I know that I was given permission to do this, but it really does do that. Sarah, when she went through the COVID stuff, and when she was out, not only getting COVID was traumatic for her, because nobody likes to be sent to the hospital, especially in this case, you didn't know. We didn't know if she was going to make it. I tell everybody, I just kind of knew she was going to make it. I don't know why, I just did. But she didn't know. She didn't. She half knocked out when they did a life flight for her. Then when they put her under the trach for the thing, they had to use narcotics to do that. And she's told me some of those dreams, just like the dreams that she had was like scary enough. I don't know if you've ever had a dream that you thought was so real that you had to like really have a conversation with yourself to like, no, that didn't happen. For her, imagine 30 days of that. Where you're just having these visions and dreams and from the drugs. It's just, she told me she thought she had been kidnapped. Imagine thinking that. And the trauma. So that's been a thing for my wife to work through for herself. And of course that has allowed her to think about other traumas in her life that she's had to really come back and process again. But I want to bring that up because this trauma, when trauma hits us like that, it'll do just like what Jacob did. You begin to forget God. Forget what he's done. He's bitter and broken. And it's kind of interesting. His phrase that he uses, it gets used later on about another traumatic situation in the Bible that's recorded in the story of Ruth. A little 4-chapter story. Talks about Ruth and a Moabitess, but she gets married to Naomi's sons. Naomi and her husband had went over to the other land because they ran out of food. But Naomi's 2 sons and her husband died. That's a lot of trauma. And she says this on her way back as she's talking to her daughters-in-law, and she has this conversation. Ruth, chapter 1, verse 13, it says, "It is exceedingly bitter for me, and for your sake, that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." That's the same language that Jacob had used. He felt like life was against him. God was against him. That's a horrible place to be. It's a horrible place to feel. When you just have that feeling, everything's going south, and God, you must hate me. God, like today when I was reading in Psalm 10, God, you don't hear me. God, you've forgotten me. And that's where Jacob was at. And now in Naomi's case, she had no known promises to bank on. She didn't know, from my lineage, there's going to be a guy named David down the line, and he'll be king. She had no idea of that. Zero clue about that. So she had nothing to bank in, nothing to hope on until Ruth, started touching base with Boaz there, and then Naomi's like, "Hey, whoa, there's a glimmer of hope in life there. Somebody to help." So she didn't know. But Jacob, though, in a sense, he did have promises. And I kind of calculated this, kind of figured out when he would have seen this. And I kind of guessed maybe about 25 to 30 years before is when he had this vision again, the vision that gave him confidence about everything, where he's like, God, what are you doing? Everybody's out to get him again. That's how he saw things. And God met him in Genesis 35 and gave him this promise. Again, it says, and God said to him, to Jacob, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. So there it is. This is what I'm going to be doing for you. This is after everything has happened. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall come for your own body. That was the promise. God had made those promises. He had made those promises before. He had evidence back from all the relatives, Isaac and Abraham. God had made promises, and so far it's all been coming true. But with this trauma, out the window. Out the window. God's forgotten me. Everything's against me. And I can sympathize with that. But it causes him, in his despair, everything goes out the window. Parts of Genesis, verse 38 again, I want to bring that up. In verse 38, I just had a couple statements where he said his brother is dead, and all this, he's going to go sorrow to Sheol, death in the grave. That's all that's on his mind now. Just like death. That's all that I have to look forward to now. Death in the grave. That's it. This is my future. That's his outlook. That's where trauma has directed him. And we have to remember, Moses is writing this. God is inspiring him to put their history together. Moses is writing this. And remember who Moses is dealing with. Moses is dealing with folks. We were talking about this yesterday. Possibly up to 5 million people that were there coming out of Egypt. And everything that they were dealing with. And we were talking about that yesterday at the men's study. Just all the logistics that they would have had to deal with. Just imagine the porta potty duty on that one. Just that. Then getting them all fed. It would have been crazy. A madhouse. I think that's what Moses means. It's supposed to be like a gift from the river, but it probably means man who went mad. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding about that. But Moses, remember, he gets them out of Egypt. And all these folks have been under slavery now for at least 100 years or so. Maybe a little bit more. Because of the regime change there and everything. And remember the trauma that they went through. Not just slavery, but the king, the Pharaoh of the land, had been killing their kids. So that's traumatic. That was even 40 or 80 years before with Moses. 80 years before, they had been getting their kids killed by the Pharaoh of the land. I can't imagine that. So that's the trauma that they had been going through themselves, a national trauma. And so this is bared forth when they get to all the stuff had happened and they're coming out, but God and Moses lead them to the edge of the Red Sea. God was doing this on purpose. They didn't know that. All they saw, hey, we're at the beach, and Pharaoh's at our back. And this is what they tell Moses. And I used to read this with a whining voice, but I realized now, no, I'm going to give them a break. These guys were scared. They truly were scared. Exodus 14, verse 11 through 12. And they said to Moses, it is because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness. Yeah, like I said, I used to read that with a whine. I thought these guys were just whining all the time. That's later. The mumbling and whining will come later. But in this case, they were afraid. This was people in trauma that are like, oh, our kids were killed and everything. Now we're led out here to die. This is it. This is where we're going to die. We're going to die in the wilderness. What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? See, the trauma said that was their life. That's what trauma does to us. It says, this is the way life will be, and it will never be any different. That's where Jacob was at. It was never going to be any different. Never going to be changed. Never was going to be any better. Verse 12, he says, is this not what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptian, for it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptian than to die in the wilderness. That was their trauma. They're like, once they figured out how to live in their trauma, and trauma was just dictating their fears and anxieties and everything else, that's where they thought, well, this is where I've learned how to just be anxious. That's it. This is my life now. Just level of anxiety, because I don't know that the trauma is doing that. Like the soldiers, when they come back and they deal with PTSD, it brings great anxiety, so they do things to cover it up. Usually the biggest thing that they do to cover it up is they do adrenaline activities. They get themselves, they'll do dangerous things in order to get that combat excitement, the things that were back then that made them afraid. When they saw their friends die in front of them, and the anxiety that they lived. And that just produces the trauma or the things that they saw in combat. Horrible things. And they try to do that, and they just don't know what to do. Now the thing is though, as a Christian, we can't see even the trauma as like an excuse. That may sound unfair. I understand. That does not minimize the trauma. The trauma is the trauma. It has done its work on hearts. However, Jesus Christ is alive and on the throne. And he knows that our life is more than the trauma. And we know that Jesus knows trauma. Scripture describes him as a man of sorrows. We know that his final day was trauma multiplied. Not just a day of crucifixion, but a day of betrayal. Not just from Judas, but a whole nation. A whole nation turning against him. He knows. Jesus knows trauma. And he knows us. And so there's hope, because he lives again. The trauma didn't end him. The trauma just adds flavor. And that's the thing. The past is always there. We can sit there and say, I try to forget the past. I don't know. We can never forget the past. But how the past has shaped us, that we can have a say in. What the past means to us, we have a say in. And that's what we have to begin to confront. Because we can't let the trauma become an excuse, because we know better. Even if we're traumatized, we know something should be different. That's why James 4:17, it says, so whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. You're like, man, Robbie, that sounds harsh. But see, even in our trauma, we know something is right. And we know things are wrong. And that's why the trauma should not become an excuse. It's like, oh, I'm traumatized, so I get to treat everybody else like crap. No, that's not how it works. Well, that means it's time to look at your trauma. Time to start talking about it. Time to start giving it over to the Lord. Talking to him about it. Talk to somebody about it. Your trauma. Talk to God. Have that frank conversation with him. It's like where the conversation where like, God, why did you? God, you came against me. Whatever. Be honest. Have that conversation. Fear is contagious. Going to go to our conclusion today. Fear is contagious, but so also is courage. Like I gave the examples from those battles. Especially at Breeds Hill, the Americans, in a sense, got their butts kicked. But they didn't let that fear stop them. They did not give in to contagious fear. They gave in to courage. They took courage. All the states, every state found out what was going on up there. Remember this one? Bunker Hill and Lexington and all those happened in 1775. 1 year before 1776. They haven't even declared independence yet. But all the states listened and saw the courage of their fellow colonists, and it emboldened them. They said, hey, maybe we can write a different story for ourselves here. And that began to make a difference. My friends, that is the same for us. We can begin to write a different story for each other when we're encouraged. 1 Thessalonians 5:14 says, and we urge you, brothers and sisters, first admonish the idle, but I'm not focusing on that today. I want to focus in on encourage the faint-hearted. Other verses, encourage those that feel weak in heart. Encourage. God is there for you. Sometimes, and I'm going to tell you, those in the middle of trauma don't want to hear anything. I'm going to tell you that. They don't want to hear it. For them, that's just words. But we who can be encouraging, sometimes we don't have to say anything. Sometimes we just have to be there. Say, oh yeah, you're going to kick and scream at me, but I'm not moving. I'm going to stay here in your trauma, in your fear, in your weakness. I'm going to encourage you. Just being there can make all the difference. Outlook. Properly directed hope and desires to God and His desires. This is a big thing, outlook. Properly directed hope and desires. A lot of times people, the reason that their outlook just stinks and continues to stink is because what they want is things that they can never have. They have desires for God to do a certain thing, and God's like, hey, yeah, I'm not going to do that. Which only leads to greater frustration. I've reiterated it before. Anger, especially out of control anger, is usually from frustration. Where you want something and you can't have it for whatever reason. And that helps you understand. So that negative outlook, maybe the way you're seeing things, you have to change the way you see things. The old joke is like you can look at the world this way or you can look at the world that way. It's just like you got to stop yourself. And sometimes this comes from encouragement from others who say, hey, how are you seeing things? That's where being alongside somebody else who sees the situation differently can sit there and say, hey, they can tell you, hey, you're asking God to do things that God won't do. Or you're seeing the situation and you're missing this, that, and the other thing. That's where that negative outlook. And no person enjoys suffering, but it is supernatural to seek joy when you're suffering. I love it because this is our mindset. This is changing how we're seeing things. James chapter 1, verse 2-3, it says, count it all joy. Or some versions say, consider it. In other words, how you're seeing life. Consider it all joy, my brothers, when you meet what? When you meet trials. And notice he says, you will meet them. How many here have had a trial-free life? I just want to see if there's that person exists. Everything is rosy for you and always has been. Does that? Yeah, no. So trials will come, and so we're directed to how we think about them. It says that you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. So to consider it joy. Now, I always have to make sure people, this is not Lawrence Welk happiness. Some of the kids are like, Lawrence Welk, what's that? I'm just remembering as a kid watching the Lawrence Welk show, and every performer on the Lawrence Welk show back in the day all had these smiles, the Lawrence Welk smiles. Everything was smiley, and you're just like, people don't naturally smile like that all the time. It's just like, something's wrong. And that's the same thing for us. If you're coming to church today and you're feeling crabby and pouty and everything's going wrong, glad you came. And you know what? If you want to stay pouty and grumpy and everything else all day long while you're here, you're fine. Go ahead. Go ahead. It's okay to show up to church hurting. I mean, I don't go to an emergency room for fun. Does anybody here go to an emergency room for a good time? No. We go to an emergency room because we're hurting. And that's one element of a church. It's a place where the hurting come. And so if we bump into a brother and sister and they're hurting, like how can you be hurting? Life happened. Life happened. And so yes, if you're hurting, it's okay to hurt. Just don't let the hurt rule the day. That's the thing. Trauma. Obviously, in all of this, I want to say, as I grew to appreciate Jacob's trauma, it's kind of changed the way I see his whole situation. I would actually, when I meet Jacob in heaven, I'm going to have to go up to him, hey, I'm sorry, dude, I didn't realize or think about it in that way. Because he went through a lot of trauma. And we should appreciate that. Do not underestimate the power of trauma. Okay? I know the power of Jesus is greater, but don't underestimate what trauma has done to you. That's the thing we talked about grief again, and like what grief does to us. Well, grief is a form of trauma. And don't underestimate it. Don't just write it off. Oh, I've been traumatized. Who cares? No, trauma has done something to you. It has wounded you. It has hurt you. You have to realize that. You have to say, hey, I have been hurt. And it's okay. Again, if life hurts you, it's okay to be hurt. Life is not always rosy. Again, when I talk about joy, joy is not this, I'm so happy that my life just went to crap. Yay. That's not how it is. No. No, joy is where it's just like, yeah, my life just went to crap. But God still loves me. And He cares for me. He's given me new life. I don't understand this, but I know that God is good. And I may not see how good He is right now, but I know that He is. And I want to think about that. I want to remember to be thankful, because even though life may be crap right now, not all of my life is crap. There's some good things. Let me think about that. Let me find the joy in what looks like a joyless situation. That's how we count it all joy. Down the line, I'm looking for more resources, because we have to remember that trauma is not an overnight fix. Just like grief, like many of us have had grief. It's not an overnight fix. Sometimes it takes months or years to go through the grief we've experienced. Well, that trauma is the same thing. It can take time. Don't expect like I got the Holy Spirit grief switch. Holy Spirit trauma switch. Click. Yay, it's all good. Yay! No, that's not life. That's not how God built us as human biological souls and everything else. No, these things have a reverberating effect, and it's going to take a little bit of time to walk through. And I'll try to find some resources for that for you guys to share if you're looking for that. Bottom line, even though these anxieties come at us and everything is there, trauma's there, we need to remember God is good and He's at work. I love this hope that comes from Peter, Mr. Foot in the Mouth Peter, who's traumatized with one of the greatest traumas of all. He looked at Jesus in the eye and denied Him. Had to face Him again. Nothing's worse than when you betrayed somebody and you have to go back, and especially when they look at you and they say, do you love me? And the trauma of that. And that's the person who writes this in 1 Peter 5:10. It says, and after you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself, I love this, he'll restore us, confirm us, strengthen, and establish us. That's what we hope in. That's where we know that we're going to. The trauma says, you're going this way. God says, we're going that way. We just have to work through the trauma. Father God, I just thank you for your honest word again today. Thank you for Jacob and his life and the things he went through, Lord, so that we could have an understanding of that, an appreciation of trauma, fear, anxieties. And Lord, sometimes they get out of control in our lives. But I just pray, Father, I pray for all of us that we would remember you. We would remember your promises. We would remember to consider the joy that can be found, even in suffering. And that someday, Lord, you'll make it all right. We trust in that. We just thank you for that, Lord. We give it to you this morning. In Jesus' name, amen.